Power is a dangerous drug, especially when it arrives with a badge and a gun. But arrogance is quieter, more insidious. It is the poison that slowly destroys the hand that holds the power. Officer Wade Croft believed himself untouchable the moment he spotted a gleaming luxury sedan parked near the courthouse and decided, out of pure racial spite, to have it towed. I wanted to teach the driver a hard lesson about who truly owned the streets. Yet Croft made one fatal error. That car belonged to the newly elected district attorney, and the DA had no intention of simply reclaiming his vehicle. He intended to dismantle the officer's entire existence. Oakidge County was a place of two sharply divided realities, split by the murky waters of the Conover River. On the north side, manicured lawns and gated driveways sheltered old money and generational privilege. On the south side, cracked pavement and flickering streetlights watched over a community that had been over-policed and underprotected for decades. Darius Langston had grown up on that south side. Now at 42, he occupied the corner office of the downtown courthouse as the county's newly elected district attorney. Langston was a force of nature, tall, impeccably tailored, and gifted with a mind as sharp as a steel trap. He had campaigned on one unwavering promise: accountability. As the first black district attorney in Oakidge history, his election had sent a localized earthquake through the county's political establishment. Nowhere was the aftershock felt more violently than in the precinct houses of the Oakidge Police Department. Officer Wade Croft was a relic of the old Oakidge. A 15-year veteran, he was a thick-necked, heavy-handed patrolman who treated the streets as his personal domain. To Croft, the law was whatever he declared it to be in any given moment. Over the course of his career, he had accumulated a staggering 24 citizen complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, and more. Yet the police union and a sympathetic old guard chief had buried every single one. Croft hated Darius Langston with a visceral, consuming passion. He hated the DA's reform policies. He hated the mandatory body camera audits Langston had instituted, and if he were honest with himself in the dead of night, he hated the simple fact that a black man from the South Side now held the power to put officers in prison. One blistering afternoon, the heat rising off the asphalt thick enough to choke on, Langston had just finished a grueling 4-hour grand jury presentation involving a corrupt city contractor. Exhausted yet focused, he had parked his personal vehicle, a pristine midnight blue Audi A6, in the overflow municipal lot a block from the courthouse. The space was explicitly reserved for county officials, and his official laminated placard sat dead center on the dashboard. Croft was cruising his sector in Car 42, air conditioning blasting, a lip full of chewing tobacco turning his saliva brown. He was already in a foul mood. Earlier that week, Langston's office had refused to prosecute a drug possession case Croft had brought in, citing an illegal, warrantless search. Croft felt humiliated. He felt emasculated. As he turned the corner onto Elm Street, the midnight blue Audi caught his eye. He slowed the cruiser to a crawl. He knew exactly whose car it was. The grapevine in the police department moved faster than fiber optic cable, and every officer in the precinct knew the new DA drove a dark blue Audi. Croft pulled up to the bumper and ran the plate through his mobile data terminal. The screen confirmed the registered owner, Darius A. Langston. A slow, malicious grin spread across Croft's face. He studied the parking space. The Audi was perfectly centered. The county official placard was clearly visible through the windshield. Yet the rear left tire rested perhaps 2 inches over the faded white line that separated the county lot from a designated fire lane. A fire lane that had not been used or repainted since an adjacent building had been demolished years earlier. To any rational officer, it was a non-issue. To Croft, it was a golden opportunity for petty, vindictive revenge. "Let's see how high and mighty you feel when you're riding the bus, counselor," he muttered. He did not call city dispatch for a municipal tow. That would leave an official paper trail a supervisor might flag. Instead, he reached for his personal cell phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Voss Towing, Earl speaking," a raspy voice answered. "Earl, it's Wade," Croft said, eyes locked on the DA's car. "I've got a live one for you down on Elm, right behind the courthouse annex, impeding a fire lane. Real public safety hazard." Earl Voss chuckled, a wet, phlegmy sound. "Right behind the courthouse. You sure about this, Wade? That's heavy brass territory." Just hook it and book it, Earl, Croft sneered, and take it all the way out to the county line yard. Make sure this one gets the premium storage fee. You got it, boss. Be there in 10. Croft sat in his idling cruiser and watched like a predator as the rusted flatbed of Voss Towing rattled down the street. He watched Earl jump out, hook the winch to the front axle of the beautiful, expensive sedan, and drag it violently up the steel ramp. The screech of the Audi's tires scraping against the metal was music to Croft's ears. He wrote no ticket. He left no notice. He simply watched the car disappear around the corner, spat his tobacco juice onto the pavement, and drove away feeling like the king of Oakidge County once again. He had no idea. He had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would obliterate his world. That evening, Darius Langston loosened his silk tie, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked out of the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The oppressive afternoon heat had given way to a muggy, stagnant dusk. He was mentally reviewing the next day's schedule, calculating the political capital he would need to persuade Mayor Grant Ellison to sign off on an independent police oversight board. Langston turned the corner into the municipal lot and stopped dead. The spot where he had parked was empty, just a rectangle of oil-stained concrete staring back at him. For a brief, irrational second, he wondered if he might have parked on a different street, but his memory was photographic. He looked down. Etched into the soft, hot asphalt were fresh, deep gouges, the unmistakable drag marks of a tow winch. Langston did not panic. He did not scream or kick a trash can. He was a man who had built his career on cold, analytical composure. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police non-emergency line. Oakidge Dispatch, Operator 44, state your emergency or inquiry. This is District Attorney Darius Langston. I'm calling to report a vehicle missing from the Elm Street Municipal Lot, or to determine if it was impounded. License plate Delta Romeo 792. A long pause followed, then the sound of furious typing. The dispatcher's voice returned, suddenly tense. Mr. Langston? Yes, sir. The vehicle was towed earlier today. The authorizing officer was Officer Wade Croft, badge 714. The cited violation is impeding a designated emergency fire zone. Langston's eyes narrowed. He looked at the faded yellow curb 10 yards away. He knew Croft's name. It sat at the top of a very thick file on his desk. Which impound lot? Voss Towing, sir, out on Route 9. Thank you. Langston hung up. He did not call the chief of police to complain. He did not demand a squad car. He simply opened his rideshare app and requested a ride. The drive out to Route 9 took 40 minutes. Voss Towing was a sprawling dirt lot graveyard of wrecked metal and chain-link fences topped with razor wire, situated on the industrial edge of the county. The smell of diesel fuel and rotting garbage hung heavy in the air. Langston walked into the tiny, stiflingly hot portable office that served as the front desk. Behind a sheet of scratched, bulletproof glass sat Earl Voss, a heavy-set man with grease-stained hands and a smug expression. "Help you?" Earl grunted, not looking up from a dirty tabloid magazine. "I'm here to retrieve my vehicle, 2022 Audi A6, Langston said, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. Earl punched keys on an ancient computer. "Yeah, I got it. Impeding a fire lane. That'll be a $250 hook fee, $100 for the dolly, and $75 for overnight storage." "It hasn't been overnight," Langston pointed out quietly. "It's been 4 hours. Past 5 o'clock counts as overnight, buddy. Town ordinance," Earl said, grinning now. "Total is $425, cash only." Langston looked through the glass. In the back office, the door stood cracked open. Sitting on a folding chair, drinking a can of cheap beer and laughing silently, was Officer Wade Croft. Croft locked eyes with Langston, raised his beer in a mock toast, and let out a booming laugh. It was a blatant display of power. A message: I can take your property, I can inconvenience you, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Langston did not break eye contact. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, and counted out $425 in crisp bills. He slid them under the slot. "I need an itemized, stamped receipt," he said to Earl, "and a copy of the police authorization form." "Whatever," Earl muttered, snatching the cash and printing a crude receipt. "Sign the release." Langston walked out to the dirt lot. His beautiful car was covered in a thick layer of dust. He walked around it slowly, noticing deep, fresh scratches on the front lower bumper where the winch chains had been improperly secured. He took out his phone and meticulously photographed the damage, the license plate, the surroundings, and the receipt. Then he climbed in, started the engine, and drove out of the gates. As he left, he saw Croft standing by his cruiser, a smirk plastered across his face. Langston did not scowl. He did not flip the officer off. As the air conditioning cooled his face, his mind shifted into a gear Croft could never comprehend. Croft thought this was a street fight. He thought he had just won a turf war, but Darius Langston did not fight in the streets. He fought in courtrooms, and he was about to unleash a legal holocaust upon the Oakidge Police Department. The following morning, the district attorney's office operated at a terrifyingly quiet frequency. Langston arrived early. Soon he had summoned his chief investigator, Sienna Brooks, into his office. Brooks was a former FBI forensic accountant who had left the bureau for a quieter life, only to find herself deeply bored until Langston hired her. She was brilliant, relentless, and possessed a deeply cynical view of local law enforcement. Langston slid the Voss towing receipt and the photographs of his car across his mahogany desk. "Officer Wade Croft had my car illegally towed yesterday," he said flatly. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Are you kidding me? He towed the DA's car. The hubris is almost impressive." "It's not hubris, Sienna. It's an illusion of invulnerability," Langston replied, steepling his fingers. "He did it to embarrass me. He did it because he thinks the badge makes him a king. But what caught my attention wasn't the tow itself. It was the operation at Voss Towing. Cash only. Exorbitant immediate fees. And Croft was sitting in the back office drinking a beer while I paid it." Brooks sat up straighter. The scent of blood was in the water. "You think they're running a racket?" "I don't think it. I know it," Langston said. "A cop like Croft doesn't just spontaneously decide to use a specific tow company out of nowhere. There's a relationship there. I want you to pull every single parking violation, impound record, and tow authorization issued by Officer Wade Croft over the last 5 years. Cross-reference them with Voss Towing. Then I want a full financial background check on Earl Voss, his LLC, and anyone connected to his business." "Darius," Brooks said, dropping the formalities, "if we open this door, the police union is going to declare open warfare on this office. Chief Briggs and the old guard will paralyze our prosecutions. They'll stop responding to subpoenas. They'll initiate a blue flu." "Let them," Langston said, his voice as hard as flint. "I was elected to clean this city up. If we have to tear the precinct down to the foundation to do it, bring me a sledgehammer." For the next several weeks, a secret war room operated out of the windowless basement of the DA's building. Only Langston, Brooks, and 2 trusted paralegals had access. What they uncovered was a conspiracy so deeply entrenched and breathtakingly corrupt that it made Langston sick to his stomach. Brooks laid out massive flowcharts on the basement walls. The data was damning. Over 5 years, Officer Croft had authorized more than 1,200 vehicle tows. A staggering 92% of those tows had been routed exclusively to Voss Towing, completely bypassing the city's rotational list of contracted, bonded tow operators. But it was the demographics that turned the corruption into a civil rights atrocity. "Look at the heat map," Brooks said, pointing a laser at a large map of Oakidge County. The north side, the wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods, was virtually blank. The south side was covered in red dots. "He's targeting minority neighborhoods," Langston observed, jaw clenched. "Low-income housing, apartment complexes, factory parking lots." "Exactly," Brooks said. "He targets people who can't afford to fight back. Single mothers, shift workers, immigrants. He fabricates violations, blocking sidewalks that don't exist, expired tags that aren't actually expired. Then he calls Earl Voss. Voss swoops in, tows the car, and demands a minimum of $400 cash to release it." "And what happens if they can't pay?" Langston asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. "After 30 days, Voss claims abandoned property, files a mechanic's lien, and auctions the cars off. Sometimes he just scraps them," Brooks explained, pulling out a financial dossier. "But here's the kill shot, Darius. I dug into the corporate structure of Voss Towing LLC. Earl Voss isn't the sole owner." She slapped a printout from the Secretary of State's office onto the table. "Voss is the registered agent. the silent partner holding a 50% equity stake through a shell corporation called Blue Line Logistics, is a woman named Marla Voss. Langston stared at the name. His sister, Brooks said grimly. Marla Voss, whose maiden name is Marla Croft. She is Wade Croft's younger sister. The puzzle pieces locked together with a deafening click. This was not petty harassment. It was a massive, highly organized racketeering enterprise. Croft used his badge to steal cars from poor people under color of law. His brother-in-law held the cars hostage for cash. The profits funneled right back into Croft's pockets through his sister's shell company. Over 5 years, they had extorted nearly $1 million from the most vulnerable citizens of Oakidge. Langston felt a terrifying, righteous clarity wash over him. This isn't a badge misconduct complaint. This is Title 18, United States Code, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, extortion under color of official right, wire fraud, civil rights violations. If we take this to a grand jury locally, it'll leak, Brooks warned. Chief Briggs has moles in the clerk's office. We aren't going local, Langston said softly. I'm calling the state attorney general, and we're bringing in the Civil Rights Division of the FBI. Oblivious to the sword dangling over his neck, Croft's arrogance only grew. Believing he had successfully intimidated the DA, he began to openly taunt Langston's staff. One rainy afternoon, he pulled over Claire Sutton, Langston's chief of staff, a brilliant young lawyer who had been instrumental in drafting the police reform bills. Croft walked up to her window, shining his heavy maglite directly into her eyes. "License and registration," he barked. "Officer, what is the reason for this stop?" Claire asked, shielding her eyes, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "Broken tail light," Croft lied smoothly. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "You work for Langston, don't you?" "Yes, I do," she replied. "Tell your boss to watch where he parks," Croft whispered, a nasty, threatening edge in his voice. "Streets are dangerous. Bad things happen to nice cars." He wrote no ticket. He simply walked away, leaving her sitting in the rain, trembling with anger. When Claire reported the incident the next morning, Langston did not react with rage. He simply nodded slowly. Croft was digging his own grave with a backhoe. Langston picked up his secure phone and dialed the private cell of Nolan Graves, the lead federal prosecutor for the district. "Nolan, it's Darius. I have a package for you. It's a localized RICO conspiracy involving the Oakidge Police Department. I have the paper trail, the financial links, and a clear pattern of civil rights violations." "How big?" Graves asked. "Big enough to end careers," Langston promised. "We need Title III wiretaps on 3 phones, and we need them yesterday. I want to hear every word Wade Croft and Earl Voss say to each other." The federal machine woke up. For the next 2 months, Croft and Voss were the stars of their very own FBI reality show, and they never knew it. Agents sat in vans half a mile from Voss Towing, listening in real time as Croft casually called in fake tows, laughed about targeting minorities, and explicitly demanded his cut of the cash on recorded lines. The net was woven tight. There were no holes. On a crisp morning, Darius Langston stood in his office looking out at the city skyline. At dawn, a fleet of black SUVs rolled into Oakidge County. The hammer was about to drop. The operation was executed with the chilling, synchronized precision that only the federal government can orchestrate. There were no local sirens, no courtesy calls to the Oakidge police chief, and absolutely no warning. A convoy of matte black Ford Explorers and armored tactical vehicles descended on 3 locations simultaneously. Voss Towing on Route 9, the suburban home of Marla and Earl Voss, and a modest split-level house on the edge of the county where Officer Wade Croft slept. Croft was jolted awake by a sound he had delivered to countless others but never expected to hear himself, the deafening splintering of his own front door being battered off its hinges. "FBI, federal warrant. Show me your hands." Croft scrambled out of bed, heart hammering wildly against his ribs. He instinctively reached for his service weapon on the nightstand, but before his fingers could brush the cold steel, the bedroom door was kicked open. 3 heavily armed FBI SWAT agents flooded the room, assault rifles leveled at his chest. The blinding beam of a tactical light pinned him against the wall. "Don't even breathe toward that gun," the lead agent barked, voice devoid of professional courtesy. "Mates, hands on your head, turn around, now." Croft, clad only in boxer shorts, raised his hands. Confusion warred with his deeply ingrained arrogance. Hold on, he stammered, voice cracking. I'm Oakidge PD. I'm on the job. You guys are making a massive mistake. We know exactly who you are, Officer Croft. Special Agent in Charge Cole Merritt said as he stepped into the room, holding a thick sheaf of papers. Wade Croft, you are under arrest for violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion under color of official right, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The words hit Croft like a physical blow. RICO. Federal charges. The color drained from his face as the agent slammed him roughly against his own dresser and ratcheted cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The terrifying reality of his situation began to set in. He was not dealing with internal affairs. He was not dealing with a slap on the wrist from a friendly police chief. He was in the grip of the Department of Justice. Simultaneously, out on Route 9, Voss Towing was being dismantled. Dozens of federal agents swarmed the dirt lot. They seized computers, filing cabinets, and the contents of a hidden floor safe containing more than $80,000 in undocumented cash. Earl Voss did not even make it to the handcuffs before he broke. Standing in his pajamas in his own driveway, watching agents tear apart his wife's home office, Earl immediately asked for a deal. The brotherhood he and Croft had shared evaporated the second Earl faced a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. By mid-morning, the news had hit the Oakidge Police Department like a tactical nuke. Chief Harlan Briggs, a red-faced, barrel-chested man who had protected Croft for years, stormed into the district attorney's office, bypassing the reception desk entirely. He threw open the doors to Langston's suite, eyes bulging with rage. "What the hell is going on, Darius?" Briggs roared, slamming his palms onto the DA's mahogany desk. "The feds just perp-walked one of my senior officers out of his house in his underwear. They bypassed my entire chain of command. You set this up." Langston did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He calmly finished signing a motion, capped his fountain pen, and looked up at the chief. "Take a seat, Harlan, or don't. But lower your voice," Langston said, his tone icy. "You brought the FBI into my precinct over a parking dispute," Briggs spat, though his bravado was faltering under Langston's dead-eyed stare. "You're destroying a man's life because he towed your precious Audi." "I brought the FBI into your precinct, Chief, because you allowed a criminal enterprise to operate out of your locker room," Langston replied, standing. He picked up a thick-bound dossier from his desk and tossed it. It landed at Briggs's feet with a heavy thud. "That is a 5-year forensic accounting of Officer Croft's towing history. Over 1,000 vehicles. $1 million extorted from the poorest, most vulnerable citizens of Oakidge, funneled directly into a shell company owned by Croft's sister. He didn't just tow my car, Harlan. He has been terrorizing the South Side under your protection, and I have it all on Title III wiretaps." "Or be over it." Briggs stared at the dossier. The color washed out of his face. The fight left his body completely. Wiretaps, financial records, RICO. The old guard playbook of sweeping things under the rug was entirely useless against a federal grand jury indictment. "The police union," Briggs started weakly. "Will not touch him," Langston interrupted. "I spoke to the union president an hour ago. Once I read him the summary of the extortion charges and mentioned the FBI Civil Rights Division, he explicitly stated they will not be funding Croft's legal defense. He is entirely alone." Langston leaned over the desk, eyes burning with years of built-up frustration against a broken system. "I told you I was going to clean up this city, Harlan. Croft was the infection. Consider this the amputation. Now get out of my office and go try to salvage whatever is left of your department's reputation." Down in the federal holding cells, Wade Croft sat shivering on a stainless steel bench. For the first time in 15 years, he was entirely stripped of his power. He had used his badge as a weapon, and now it was gone. The only things waiting for him were a judge, a jury, and the terrifying realization that he was about to face the very justice system he had spent his career manipulating. The criminal trial of the United States versus Wade Croft was not a battle. It was a clinical, methodical slaughter. From the moment the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open, it was clear that Croft's reign of terror had reached its terminal conclusion. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity. Reporters filled the back benches. Citizens from the South Side, people who had spent years being victimized in silence, lined the gallery. Federal prosecutor Nolan Graves moved through his case in chief with the terrifying precision of a surgeon. He did not rely on grand theatrics. He relied on an avalanche of undeniable data. For 3 days, Graves paraded the victims of Croft's extortion ring before the jury. Single mothers who had lost their jobs because they could not get to work. Elderly men who had their only mode of transportation auctioned off for pennies. Young college students who had their savings wiped out to pay Voss towing. But the fatal blow to Croft's defense was not the victims' tearful testimonies, nor was it Sienna Brooks's masterful breakdown of the forensic accounting. The fatal blow was Earl Voss. Desperate to avoid dying in a federal penitentiary, Earl had taken an aggressive plea deal and turned state's evidence. When his name was called to the witness stand, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. He wore a rumpled, ill-fitting suit, a stark contrast to his usual grease-stained coveralls. As he raised his right hand to swear the oath, he steadfastly refused to look at the defense table. Earl did not just throw his brother-in-law under the bus. He reversed over him. Guided by Graves's sharp questioning, Earl detailed the entire operation from its inception. He explained the encrypted radio codes Croft used to signal a lucrative target. He described the cash drops that took place in brown paper bags during Sunday family barbecues, the money handed over while children played in the yard. Then came the centerpiece of Earl's testimony, the ledger. He handed the prosecution the meticulously kept, handwritten accounting book his wife Marla had hidden beneath the floorboards of their home. Every illegal tow, every fabricated violation, and every split of the cash was documented. It was a roadmap of pure, unadulterated corruption. Yet Graves saved his most devastating weapon for the final afternoon of the prosecution's case. He submitted a flash drive into evidence, the Title III FBI wiretaps. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. It was a recording from late summer, mere weeks before the federal raid. The pristine acoustics of the federal courthouse amplified Wade Croft's recorded voice, dripping with contempt, entitlement, and sheer arrogance. "I got another live one for you, Earl," Croft's voice echoed, accompanied by the faint sound of his cruiser's turn signal clicking in the background. "Down at the Cypress Housing Projects. Nice little silver Honda Civic. The tags are good and she's parked legal, but I'm writing it up as a public nuisance, blocking a fire hydrant. Let the single mom ride the bus for a few weeks and think about her life choices. Make sure you hit her with the maximum overnight storage fee, brother. Daddy needs that new cedar deck for the backyard." A collective, audible gasp swept through the gallery. Several jurors physically recoiled in their seats, faces twisting in absolute disgust. In the front row, Darius Langston sat perfectly motionless. His face was an unreadable mask of stone, eyes fixed on the defense table. At that table, Wade Croft, physically shattered. The arrogant, thick-necked cop who had terrorized the streets was gone. He shrank into his chair, burying his face in his trembling hands, trying to hide from the burning stares of the jury and the public. He could no longer hide behind the thin blue line. The entire world had just heard him for what he truly was, a predator masquerading as a protector. The next morning, before the defense attorney could even attempt to present a hollow opening statement, Croft surrendered. Approaching the bench with his head bowed, his lawyer announced that Croft was changing his plea to guilty on all federal counts. The criminal fight was over, but Darius Langston's war was fought on two fronts. While the federal government secured Croft's impending imprisonment, Langston had quietly set the stage to obliterate the corrupt financial and political infrastructure that had allowed the officer to thrive. As a sitting district attorney, Langston was legally barred from filing civil lawsuits against the city, but his former law school roommate and notoriously ruthless civil rights attorney, Reese Calder, operated under no such restrictions. The moment Croft's guilty plea was entered into the federal record, Langston arranged for Calder to receive the entire unsealed federal evidence file. Armed with a mountain of absolute, judicially validated proof, Calder filed a monstrous multi-million-dollar class-action civil rights lawsuit against the city of Oakidge, the Oakidge Police Department, and Wade Croft personally. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal destruction. It alleged a systemic, decades-long failure to supervise, train, and discipline officers, explicitly pointing to Croft's 24 buried citizen complaints as undeniable proof that the city's leadership had been entirely complicit in the extortion ring. The city council and Mayor Grant Ellison panicked. The evidence was completely indefensible. Taking a class action suit of this magnitude to a civil jury in the current political climate would result in a verdict that could literally bankrupt the municipality. Within weeks, the city capitulated, agreeing to a staggering $6 million settlement. This money was placed in a restitution fund for the hundreds of victims Croft had preyed upon over the years. But Langston had not engineered the lawsuit just for the money. Buried within the binding settlement agreement was a non-negotiable stipulation. Mayor Ellison was legally mandated to immediately create and fully fund the Independent Civilian Police Oversight Board, the exact institution the political establishment had spent years blocking. Seeing the undeniable writing on the wall and terrified that he might be named in a secondary federal probe regarding the buried complaints, Police Chief Harlan Briggs did not wait to be fired. He quietly cleared out his office under the cover of darkness and submitted his early retirement papers, fleeing the city in disgrace. And then came the bureaucratic execution that finally broke Croft's spirit entirely. Because Croft had pleaded guilty to severe federal felonies committed while explicitly acting under color of official law, a state tribunal was convened to invoke a rarely used punitive municipal statute. In a hearing that lasted less than 20 minutes, Wade Croft was permanently stripped of his law enforcement pension. Every single dime he had paid into the retirement system over his 15-year career was seized and liquidated to help fund the restitution payments to his victims. He was left with absolutely nothing, no savings, no future, no safety net. On the day of his formal sentencing, Croft stood before Federal District Judge Miriam Holt. He wore a bright orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled to a heavy chain around his waist. He looked 20 years older. The hollow, terrified stare of a ruined man had replaced the smug smirk he had worn only months earlier. "Mr. Croft," Judge Holt began, her voice echoing coldly in the cavernous room, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Law enforcement officers are granted extraordinary, almost unfathomable power by the public trust. You weaponized that sacred trust. You did not protect and serve your community. You hunted and extorted them. You specifically targeted those who you believed had no voice, no financial power, and no legal recourse. And you did it out of sheer, unadulterated greed and vindictive spite." She adjusted her glasses, staring down at him from the elevated bench with absolute contempt. "You believed your badge made you immune to the consequences of your actions. You believed you were above the law. Let today serve as a permanent reminder to anyone who wears a uniform that the law is a very heavy object to have fall upon you. I sentence you to 144 months in federal prison to be served consecutively with no possibility of early release or parole. 12 years. As the heavyset U.S. Marshals grabbed Croft by the arms to lead him toward the holding cells, he stopped. He looked back over his shoulder into the packed gallery. He bypassed the reporters and the victims, locking eyes with Darius Langston one final time. Langston did not gloat. He did not offer a triumphant smile. He simply offered a slow, deliberate nod, a silent, chilling acknowledgement of a promise kept. The district attorney picked up his leather briefcase, turned his back on the disgraced, ruined cop, and walked out of the courtroom, ready to get back to the work of rebuilding his city. The heavy reinforced steel door of cell 412 slammed shut with a deafening metallic finality that echoed through the bleak corridors of the Federal Correctional Institution. It was a sound Wade Croft would have to get used to. He was no longer Officer Croft. He was inmate 88492054. Because of his status as a former law enforcement officer, placing Croft in the general population was equivalent to a death sentence. The federal prison system was overflowing with men who harbored a deep, violent hatred for the badge. Consequently, Croft was placed in the Special Housing Unit, a segregated wing designed for high-profile inmates, informants, and disgraced cops. It was, for all intents and purposes, solitary confinement. For 23 hours a day, Croft sat in a concrete box measuring 6 feet by 9 feet. There was a thin mattress on a steel slab, a stainless steel toilet, and a narrow slit of frosted glass that let in a dull, mocking sliver of daylight. The man who had once roamed the streets of Oakidge in a climate-controlled cruiser, barking orders and watching citizens tremble, was now entirely powerless. He dictated nothing. He controlled nothing. He was told when to wake, when to eat the tasteless, tepid food shoved through a slot in his door, and when to take his single hour of recreation in a chain-link cage under the watchful eyes of armed guards. In the suffocating silence of his cell, the arrogance that had defined his life slowly rotted into a desperate, gnawing paranoia. Croft had endless hours to replay the events in his mind. The midnight blue Audi, the smug call to Earl Voss, the petty joy of watching the DA's car dragged away. He had traded a comfortable life, a guaranteed pension, and his freedom for a momentary thrill of spite. While Croft withered in the dark, the city of Oakidge was undergoing a painful, spectacular rebirth. Darius Langston did not rest on the laurels of his victory. Taking down Croft and the Voss towing extortion ring was only the amputation of the most infected limb. Langston was determined to cure the whole body. The $6 million class action settlement had bankrupted the political capital of the old guard. Mayor Grant Ellison, terrified of further federal scrutiny, gave Langston virtually everything he demanded. The Oakidge Civilian Police Oversight Board was officially ratified. It was not a toothless committee of political appointees. Langston ensured the board had subpoena power, independent investigators, and the authority to recommend the immediate termination of officers who violated civil rights. But the remnants of the old Oakidge Police Department did not surrender quietly. Captain Silas Dre, a 20-year veteran and a close friend of the disgraced Chief Briggs, attempted to organize a subtle rebellion. Dre encouraged his patrolmen to engage in a work slowdown, a deliberate stalling of response times to the South Side, hoping the spike in petty crime would force the city to dismantle the oversight board. Langston saw the mutiny forming before it fully materialized. He called his chief investigator, Sienna Brooks. "Dre is playing games," Langston said, staring at the weekly dispatch metrics that showed response times in minority neighborhoods had inexplicably doubled. "He thinks he can hold the city hostage." "He's using the union to shield himself," Brooks replied, tapping a pen against her notebook. "The patrolmen won't talk. They're terrified of retaliation." "We don't need them to talk. We have the data," Langston said, voice cold and resolute. "Audit the GPS trackers on every cruiser in Dre's sector. Cross-reference their idle times with the incoming 911 logs. If they are sitting in parking lots while emergency calls are holding, we don't just fire them. We indict them for official misconduct and reckless endangerment." The audit was brutal and incredibly swift. Brooks uncovered that Dre had explicitly ordered units to stand down on nonviolent calls in the South Side. Armed with the digital proof, Langston did not bother with a closed-door meeting. He bypassed the department entirely and took the evidence directly to the newly formed Oversight Board's first public hearing. In a packed city council chamber, with local news cameras rolling, Langston laid out the GPS data. He publicly accused Captain Dre of weaponizing public safety for political leverage. Under the glaring lights of public scrutiny and facing the terrifying prospect of joining Croft in federal prison, Dre's resolve crumbled. He resigned in disgrace the very next morning, taking 3 of his most toxic loyalist sergeants with him. The purge sent a shockwave through the precinct. The message was unmistakable. The era of the untouchable badge was dead and buried. To replace the outgoing rot, Mayor Ellison, heavily influenced by Langston, brought in an outside reformer as the new chief of police, Chief Everett Sloan, a man known for transparency and community-based policing. Sloan immediately implemented mandatory de-escalation training, strict auditing of all impounds, and a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. On the South Side, the atmosphere slowly began to change. The $6 million in settlement funds began flowing into the community. Families who had been financially crippled by Croft's extortion ring received heavy restitution checks. Single mothers got their savings back. Men who had lost their jobs because they could not afford to rescue their cars from Voss Towing found themselves with the capital to start over for the first time in generations. The residents of the South Side looked at the district attorney's office not as an instrument of oppression, but as a shield. And what of the Voss family? The criminal conspiracy had fractured them beyond repair. Earl Voss served his time in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, his marriage to Croft's sister completely destroyed. Marla Voss, the architect of the Shell Company, avoided prison by cooperating fully and turning over every hidden asset, but she was left utterly destitute. The federal government seized her home, her bank accounts, and her vehicles. She was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the county, working night shifts at a fulfillment center just to survive. Forever marked as a convicted felon, the empire of petty tyranny had been burned to the ground. But the final chapter of Wade Croft's story had yet to be written. Years later, the sweltering heat of high summer had once again descended upon Oakidge County. The city was fundamentally different now. Crime rates had stabilized. Police-community relations were experiencing unprecedented levels of trust. And Darius Langston had just won his re-election campaign in a historic landslide, securing more than 80% of the vote. He was no longer just a district attorney. He was a rising star in state politics, heavily favored for a future run at the governor's mansion. Claire Sutton, the chief of staff Croft had once intimidated in the rain, was now the deputy district attorney, leading a task force dedicated to cold case civil rights violations. The DA's office was a well-oiled machine of justice, blind to wealth and deaf to the old boy network. Inside the walls of the Federal Correctional Institution, time had not been kind to Wade Croft. Years in solitary confinement had stripped away his physical bulk and his sanity. His hair had thinned and turned entirely gray. His posture, once broad and intimidating, was permanently stooped. The terrifying reality of his 12-year sentence was an inescapable weight pressing down on his chest every waking second. Croft had spent the first 3 years fighting. He had filed endless appeals claiming entrapment, claiming selective prosecution, arguing that his sentence was disproportionately harsh. Every single appeal was swiftly and mercilessly denied by the appellate courts. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, the public corruption too severe. Desperation is a powerful force. It strips a man of his pride layer by agonizing layer until only a naked, trembling need remains. Having exhausted all legal avenues, Croft did the unthinkable. He requested a pen and a single sheet of paper from the prison guard. Sitting on the edge of his steel bed, hands shaking, he wrote a letter to the one man who possessed the power to recommend a sentence commutation to the Department of Justice. He wrote to District Attorney Darius Langston. The letter was a masterpiece of pathetic manipulation. Croft did not truly apologize for the lives he had ruined. He apologized that things had gotten out of hand. He wrote about the mental toll of solitary confinement. He begged Langston, as a man of God and the law, to show mercy. He asked Langston to submit a letter of support to the Federal Parole Board to shave a few years off his sentence, promising he would move away, change his name, and never return to Oakidge. A week later, Claire Sutton walked into Langston's spacious corner office and dropped a plain white envelope stamped with the federal prison insignia onto his desk. "You're going to want to read this," she said, an unreadable expression on her face. "It's from FCI Schuylkill, inmate Croft." Langston picked up the envelope. He used a silver letter opener to slice it open and unfolded the single sheet of ruled paper. The handwriting was cramped, erratic, a stark contrast to the bold, aggressive citations Croft used to write on fabricated parking tickets. Langston read the letter in total silence. His expression never changed. He did not smile in triumph, nor did he frown in pity. He read the words of a broken man begging for the very mercy he had aggressively denied to hundreds of innocent citizens for years. "What does he want?" Claire asked. "He wants a recommendation for a sentence reduction," Langston replied softly. "He says he's learned his lesson. He says the cage is breaking his mind." "Are you going to respond?" Langston leaned back in his leather chair and looked out the window. Down below, the city of Oakidge moved in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He thought about the heat map Sienna Brooks had generated years earlier, the sea of red dots clustered over the poorest neighborhoods. He thought about the single mothers forced to choose between feeding their children and paying an extortion fee to get their cars back. He thought about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of a man who believed the law was merely a tool for his own enrichment. Mercy is a virtue, but justice is a requirement. Langston opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a thick file labeled United States versus Croft, archival. He flipped through the meticulously organized pages until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a legal brief or an FBI wiretap transcript. It was a photocopy of a crude, grease-stained receipt from Voss Towing, the same receipt Langston had demanded on that sweltering evening years earlier. The receipt for $425, cash only. Langston took a thick black marker and wrote 3 words across the top of the receipt. Denied. Serve your time. He did not write a letter. He did not explain his reasoning. He simply folded the photocopy, slid it into a fresh envelope, addressed it back to inmate 88492054, and handed it to Claire. Mail this, Langston instructed, and then close the file. We are done with Wade Croft forever. When the envelope arrived at the federal prison, Croft tore it open with frantic, trembling fingers, praying for a lifeline. When he pulled out the photocopy of the tow receipt and read the black ink across the top, the last remaining shred of his hope evaporated. The paper slipped from his hands and fluttered to the cold concrete floor. Croft sat on his steel bunk, buried his face in his hands, and finally wept. He had towed a car to teach a man a lesson. Instead, he had dismantled his own life piece by piece until nothing remained but the 4 walls of a cage. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Oakidge skyline, casting long golden shadows across the streets, Darius Langston left the courthouse. He walked with the confident, steady stride of a man who had kept his promises to his city. He turned the corner and walked into the municipal parking lot. The faded yellow lines of the old fire lane had long since been removed, repainted into perfectly measured, pristine parking stalls. Langston walked up to his car, the same midnight blue Audi A6. He unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The dashboard lit up with a soft, high-tech glow in the fading light. As he pulled out of the lot and merged onto Elm Street, nobody watched him from the shadows. No corrupt officer ran his plates. No tow trucks waited around the block. There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the profound, undeniable presence of justice in a city that had finally learned how to fight back. Power without accountability is a dangerous weapon, but as Officer Wade Croft learned the hard way, arrogance is the ultimate trap. He thought his badge made him a king, giving him the right to extort, humiliate, and steal from the vulnerable. But he messed with the wrong district attorney. Darius Langston did not fight back with yelling or violence. He fought back with the devastating, crushing weight of the law, permanently changing a city and ending a corrupt empire. The hunter became the hunted, and a petty parking dispute ended in a 12-year federal prison sentence. True justice does not boast, it executes. What did you think of District Attorney Langston's brilliant, silent revenge? Did Officer Croft get exactly what he deserved, or was the punishment too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true life stories where the bad guys finally get what's coming to them.